I gave myself completely to a man who seemed like a gift from God, and he destroyed me with his pride. My name is Grace. I'm 68 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood in Jacksonville, Florida. My days now are filled with my daughter Melissa's visits, my grandson's laughter echoing through my small living room, and the hum of the air conditioning fighting against the humid southern heat. I have my morning coffee on the porch. I watch the palm trees sway in the breeze, and I thank God every single day for the peace I finally found. But it wasn't always like this. There was a time when I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me in the mirror. A time when I believed that love meant shrinking myself so small that I could fit into the shadow of a man who thought he was better than everyone else, especially me. When I say I gave myself to him, I mean everything. My body, yes, but so much more than that. I gave him my trust, my hope, my dreams of what a marriage could be. I gave him my dignity. I gave him pieces of my soul I didn't even know I was handing over until there was almost nothing left of me. And for years, I thought that was what love was supposed to feel like. Let me tell you something, honey. When you're a woman of a certain generation, my generation, you were taught that a good man was a prize. That if he was decent, if he worked, if he didn't hit you or drink too much, then you had won some kind of lottery. You were supposed to be grateful. You were supposed to make it work. And Richard? Oh, Richard was perfect on paper. He was tall, well-dressed, always smelling faintly of aftershave and ambition. He had thick, dark hair that he combed back like the men in old movies, and a smile that made every woman at our church on Sunday mornings take a second glance. He worked in sales, drove a nice car, and spoke with the kind of confidence that made you believe everything he said was gospel truth. When he walked into a room, people noticed. When he spoke, people listened. And when he looked at me, really looked at me, with those deep brown eyes that seemed to see straight through to my heart, I felt like I was the only woman in the world. I was 24 years old when we met. It was 1981, and I was working in the cafeteria at an elementary school in Riverside, serving sloppy joes and apple slices to kids who barely said thank you. My hands smelled like bleach and industrial soap, my uniform was always a little too tight, and I lived in a cramped apartment with 2 other girls from church who were also trying to make ends meet. I wasn't looking for a man. I was looking for stability. For a future that didn't involve living paycheck to paycheck and wondering if I'd ever have something of my own. And then Richard walked into my life like he'd been sent by divine intervention. We met at a community potluck after Sunday service. I had brought my grandmother's casserole, the one with the crispy fried onions on top that everyone always asked for the recipe. He came up to me with a plate in his hand and said, "This is the best thing I've ever tasted. Did you make this?" I blushed. I actually blushed. "Yes, sir. It's my grandmother's recipe." He smiled, slow and deliberate, and said, "Well, I'd sure like to get to know the woman who can cook like this." And just like that, I was hooked. He courted me the old-fashioned way. Flowers delivered to the school cafeteria that made all the other women whisper and giggle. Phone calls that lasted hours, where he told me about his dreams of owning his own business, of building a life that mattered. Dinners at the diner on the edge of town, where he'd order for both of us because he said, a man should take care of his woman. I thought it was romantic. I thought I was lucky. 6 months later, we were married in a small ceremony at the church, with my mother crying happy tears and his family nodding their approval like I'd passed some kind of test. I wore a simple white dress I'd found on sale at a department store, and he wore a suit that made him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. I remember standing at the altar, looking into his eyes and thinking, this is it. This is the life I've been praying for. I moved into his house, a modest 2-bedroom in a suburban neighborhood where the lawns were neatly trimmed and everyone waved at each other from their driveways. I quit my job at the cafeteria because he said he made enough for both of us and that a wife's place was at home, taking care of things. I didn't question it. I decorated the house, learned to make his favorite meals, ironed his shirts until they were perfect. I smiled when he came home from work, asked about his day, listened to his stories about closing deals and impressing clients. And for a while, for a precious, fragile while, I thought I was happy. But there were moments, small moments I ignored because I didn't want to see them for what they were. Like the way he corrected me in front of his friends, laughing like it was a joke, but with an edge that made my stomach tighten. "Grace doesn't really understand business," he'd say. "She's more of a homebody." Or the way he'd sigh when I asked him questions about money, like I was a child who couldn't possibly grasp something so complex. "Don't worry your pretty little head about it, honey. I've got it handled." Or the way his smile would disappear the moment we were alone, replaced by something colder. Something that made me feel like I was always one wrong word away from disappointing him. But I told myself I was being sensitive, that I was lucky to have a husband who provided for me. That love wasn't always easy. I told myself a lot of things back then, things I would spend the next 20 years regretting, because the man I gave myself to, body, heart, and soul, wasn't a gift from God. He was a test, and I almost failed it. Let me paint you a picture of who I was back then so you can understand how a woman like me, a woman who thought she knew herself, could end up losing herself so completely. I grew up in a small town outside of Tampa, the youngest of 3 girls in a family that didn't have much but always had enough. My father worked at a factory. My mother cleaned houses for the wealthier families on the other side of town. We said grace before every meal, went to church every Sunday, and knew that hard work and faith were the only things that would get you anywhere in this world. I was taught that a woman's greatest achievement was becoming a good wife, that if you could cook, clean, and keep a man happy, you'd done your job. College wasn't even a conversation in our house. My older sisters got married right out of high school, one to a mechanic, the other to a man who worked at the electric company, and everyone expected I'd do the same. But I was stubborn. I wanted something different, even if I didn't quite know what that meant. So instead of getting married at 18, I moved to Jacksonville with $50 in my pocket and a suitcase full of dreams I couldn't even name. I got the job at the elementary school cafeteria, found the apartment with the 2 church girls, and told myself I was building a life. I was independent. I was making my own money. I was free. But freedom, I learned, can feel a lot like loneliness when you're living in a tiny apartment where the air conditioning barely works and you're eating ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week. And that's the state I was in when Richard found me, or maybe I should say, when I let him find me. Because looking back now, with all the clarity that age and distance bring, I realize I wasn't just attracted to Richard. I was attracted to the idea of him, the stability he represented, the escape from a life that felt small and uncertain. He was 32 when we met, 8 years older than me, and he carried himself like a man who had already figured out all the answers. He had a steady job with a growing company, a house with his name on the deed, a car that didn't break down every other week. He talked about the future like it was something he could control, like success was just a matter of working hard enough and being smart enough. And God, I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that if I just attached myself to the right man, everything else would fall into place. Our courtship was a whirlwind. He took me to places I'd never been. Nice restaurants where the waiters wore bow ties, drives along the coast where we'd watch the sunset over the Gulf, weekend trips to Orlando where we'd walk through theme parks like we were just 2 regular people in love. He told me I was beautiful. He told me I was special. He told me that meeting me had changed his life. And I believed him. I believed him when he said he wanted to take care of me. I believed him when he said I didn't need to work anymore, that his salary was more than enough for both of us. I believed him when he said that a wife's job was to make a home, and that if I did that, he'd make sure I never wanted for anything. It sounded like a fairy tale. It sounded like everything I'd been taught to want. So when he proposed to me on a warm June evening, down on one knee in front of the fountain at the park near his house, I didn't hesitate. I said yes before he even finished asking the question. My mother cried when I told her. "You did good, Gracie," she said, holding my hands in hers. "You found a good man, a provider. That's all a woman can ask for." Even my father, who rarely showed emotion, shook Richard's hand and said, "You take care of my girl." And Richard smiled that confident, winning smile and said, "I will, sir. I promise." The wedding was small but beautiful. I wore a dress I'd found at a bridal shop that was going out of business. Simple, elegant, with lace sleeves that made me feel like a princess. Richard's family filled most of the church pews. His mother was a stern woman with tight curls and a mouth that rarely smiled, but she told me I looked appropriate, which I took as a compliment. His father was louder, more gregarious, the kind of man who slapped backs and told jokes that weren't quite funny, but everyone laughed at anyway. He pulled me aside before the ceremony and said, "Richard's a smart boy. He knows what he wants. You just make sure you keep him happy, and everything will work out fine." I nodded and smiled, even though something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. But I pushed the feeling aside. This was my wedding day. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. And it was. Or at least, I convinced myself it was. The reception was held in the church fellowship hall, with folding tables covered in white plastic tablecloths and a buffet of casseroles, fried chicken, and sheet cake from the Publix bakery. We danced to Lionel Richie and Elvis, and Richard held me close and whispered in my ear that he couldn't wait to start our life together. That night, we drove to his house, our house now, and he carried me over the threshold like they do in the movies. I laughed, giddy and nervous, and he set me down in the living room and kissed me with a kind of intensity that made my knees weak. "You're mine now," he said, his hands on my face, his eyes locked on mine. "All mine." And I smiled and said, "Yes, all yours." I thought it was romantic. I thought it was love. I didn't realize it was a warning. The first few weeks of marriage were like living in a dream. I spent my days organizing the house, learning where Richard kept everything, making sure his favorite foods were always stocked in the fridge. I'd wake up early to make him breakfast before he left for work. Eggs, bacon, toast with butter, coffee just the way he liked it. He'd kiss me on the forehead and say, "You're a good wife, Grace. I made the right choice." And I'd beam with pride, like I'd won some kind of prize. But slowly, so slowly I didn't even notice it happening, things began to shift. It started with little comments. Observations, he called them. "You know, you really should wear more makeup. You looked so pretty on our wedding day. This casserole is a little dry, don't you think? Maybe you should try your grandmother's recipe again. Why do you need to call your mother so often? You're a married woman now. Your focus should be here, at home." Each comment on its own seemed harmless, reasonable even. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't being cruel. He was just guiding me, helping me be better. At least that's what I told myself. I started wearing more makeup. I made the casserole again and again, until it was perfect. I called my mother less, and when I did, I kept the conversation short. I adjusted. I adapted. I became smaller. And Richard seemed pleased. He'd come home from work, survey the house, and nod approvingly. "See?" he'd say. "I knew you had it in you. You just needed a little direction." I should have seen it then. I should have recognized the pattern forming. But I was young, and I was in love, and I so desperately wanted to be good enough. So I kept adjusting. I kept shrinking, and Richard kept taking up more space. For the first year of our marriage, Richard was everything I thought a husband should be. He was attentive in ways that made me feel special. Every Friday, he'd bring home flowers, nothing extravagant, just a simple bouquet from the grocery store, and place them on the kitchen table with a kiss on my cheek. "For my beautiful wife," he'd say, and I'd feel that warm flutter in my chest that made me believe I was the luckiest woman alive. He was respected in our community. At church, people would seek him out after service, asking his opinion on everything from car repairs to investment advice. He'd stand in the parking lot in his pressed slacks and button-down shirt, hands in his pockets, nodding thoughtfully as he dispensed wisdom, like he was some kind of oracle. The pastor even asked him to join the finance committee, a position Richard accepted with the kind of humble pride that made everyone admire him even more. "It's important to give back," he'd say at dinner, cutting into his steak. "God has blessed us, Grace. The least I can do is help steward his church's resources." I'd nod and agree, proud to be married to a man who was so involved, so important. Our neighbors loved him too. He'd help Mr. Patterson next door fix his lawnmower, spend Saturday afternoons talking sports with the men on the block, always ready with a firm handshake and that easy, confident smile. The women would tell me how lucky I was, sometimes with a hint of envy in their voices. "Your Richard is such a gentleman," Mrs. Kowalski would say over the fence while watering her roses. "Not like my Henry. That man can barely remember to take out the trash." And I'd smile, feeling that swell of pride again. Yes, I'd think, I did good. I married well. He took care of our finances with the kind of meticulous attention that put me at ease. Every bill was paid on time. Every purchase was calculated. He kept a ledger in his study, a brown leather book where he tracked every dollar that came in and went out. "Money is power, Grace," he'd tell me when I'd peek into his study and see him hunched over that ledger, pen in hand. "And power means security. I'm making sure we're secure." I never questioned it. Why would I? The lights stayed on, the mortgage was paid, there was always food in the fridge. What did I know about finances anyway? He was the one with the head for numbers, the one who understood how the world worked. My job was to take care of the home. His job was to take care of everything else. It seemed fair. It seemed right. On weekends, we'd drive out to the beaches along the coast, sometimes St. Augustine, sometimes Amelia Island, and walk along the shore with our shoes in our hands, the warm Atlantic water lapping at our ankles. He'd hold my hand and talk about his dreams of starting his own business someday, of building something that would last, something he could be proud of. "I want to give you the life you deserve," he'd say, squeezing my hand. "A bigger house, maybe even kids someday if that's what you want. I want to build an empire, Grace, and I want you by my side while I do it." The way he said empire made it sound noble, like we were conquering something together. I loved those moments. The salt air, the sound of the waves, the feeling that we were a team, that we were building something meaningful. But even then, even during those golden, shimmering moments, there were cracks. Small ones, hairline fractures I'd notice and then immediately explain away, like the time we went to dinner with his colleagues from work. It was at a steakhouse in downtown Jacksonville, dark wood paneling and leather booths, the kind of place where the men ordered whiskey and talked about deals they were closing. I wore my nicest dress, emerald green with a modest neckline, and I'd curled my hair the way Richard liked it. We sat at a large table with 3 other couples, and the conversation flowed easily at first. The men talked business, the women talked about their children or home renovations or the new shopping center opening up near the interstate. I mostly listened. I didn't have children to talk about, and I didn't know much about the kind of renovations these women were discussing. Marble countertops and professional landscaping and heated pools. At one point, one of the women, Linda, a blonde with perfectly manicured nails and a diamond tennis bracelet, turned to me and asked, "So Grace, what do you do?" It was an innocent question, a normal question, but I felt my cheeks flush. I take care of the home," I said, trying to sound confident. "I'm a homemaker." Linda smiled politely. "Oh, how wonderful! That's so important." But before I could respond, Richard cut in, his voice carrying that easy charm he always used in public. "Grace used to work in a school cafeteria before we got married, serving lunch to kids. But I told her she didn't need to do that anymore. A man should be able to provide for his wife, don't you think?" The table murmured in agreement, but I felt something twist in my stomach. The way he said used to work in a school cafeteria, like it was something quaint and amusing, something to be left behind. Linda nodded. "Of course, my Roger feels the same way. A woman's touch at home makes all the difference." But I caught the look in her eyes. Pity, maybe. Or judgment. I couldn't tell. Richard reached over and patted my hand. Grace is wonderful at taking care of me. Aren't you, sweetheart? I smiled and nodded. Yes, of course. But inside, something felt off. Another crack appeared a few months later when my mother called to tell me my sister Sarah was having trouble with her marriage. Her husband had lost his job, and they were struggling to make ends meet. I was thinking maybe we could help them out, I said to Richard that evening over dinner. Just a little bit, maybe a few $100s to get them through the month. Richard set down his fork and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, exactly. Something colder. Grace, he said slowly, like he was explaining something to a child. We're not a bank. Your sister's husband needs to figure out his own problems. If I bail him out now, what's going to stop him from coming back next month, and the month after that? But she's my sister, and I'm your husband, he interrupted, his voice firm. Your loyalty is to me now, to this family, not to the family you came from. Do you understand? I felt my throat tighten. I just thought, that's the problem, Grace. You're not thinking. You're being emotional. He picked up his fork again and cut into his chicken. I make the financial decisions in this house. That's how it works. That's how it's supposed to work. I stared down at my plate, my appetite gone. Okay, I whispered. I understand. He reached across the table and lifted my chin with his finger, forcing me to look at him. His smile was back, warm and reassuring. Hey, I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm just trying to protect us. You trust me, don't you? Yes, I said, because what else could I say? I trust you. Good. He kissed my forehead. That's my girl. But that night, lying in bed next to him while he slept soundly, I stared at the ceiling and felt something I couldn't name. A discomfort, a doubt, a tiny voice in the back of my mind whispering, is this what love is supposed to feel like? But I pushed it down. I buried it, because Richard was a good man. Everyone said so. He provided for me. He was respected. He loved me. The problem wasn't him. The problem, I told myself, was me. I just needed to be better. More understanding, less sensitive. I just needed to trust him more. And so I did. I ignored the cracks. I ignored the warning signs. I ignored the growing feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. Because love meant trusting your husband, didn't it? Love meant letting him lead. Love meant making it work, no matter what. At least, that's what I'd been taught. And I was determined to be a good wife, even if it meant losing myself in the process. The shift didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, like the way the Florida sky darkens before a storm. So slow, you don't realize how dark it's gotten, until suddenly you're standing in the middle of it, soaked to the bone, wondering how you didn't see it coming. About 18 months into our marriage, Richard got a promotion at work, senior sales manager. It came with a raise, a bigger office, and a new level of confidence that seemed to radiate off him like heat from asphalt in July. He started coming home later. Not outrageously late, 7, sometimes 8 o'clock, but late enough that the dinners I'd carefully prepared would be dry and lukewarm by the time he sat down to eat. Sorry, honey, he'd say, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. Big meeting with the regional director. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was, actually, but I'd nod and reheat his plate and sit across from him while he ate, telling me about office politics I couldn't follow and people I'd never met. He stopped asking about my day. Not that there was much to tell. My days had become a predictable rhythm. Wake up, make breakfast, clean the house, run errands, prepare dinner, wait. But still, he used to ask. He used to pretend he cared about the small details of my life. Now, he just talked, and I just listened. One evening, I decided to surprise him. I'd spent the entire afternoon making his favorite meal, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the way his mother used to make it. I'd even baked a pecan pie from scratch, my hands sticky with corn syrup and my kitchen smelling like brown sugar and cinnamon. I set the table with our good dishes, the ones we'd gotten as wedding gifts that we almost never used. I lit candles. I wore the lavender dress he'd once told me looked beautiful on me. When he walked in at 7:30, I was waiting in the dining room, smiling. He looked at the table, looked at me, and his expression didn't change. "What's all this?" he asked, setting down his briefcase. "I made your favorite," I said, my voice bright with anticipation. "I thought we could have a nice dinner together, just the two of us." He glanced at his watch. "Grace, I've got a conference call with the West Coast office in 20 minutes. I need to eat quickly and get to my study." My smile faltered. "Oh, I didn't know." "How could you know? You don't know anything about my work schedule." He said it casually, like it was a statement of fact, not an insult. "Next time, maybe check with me before you go to all this trouble." He sat down, served himself, and ate in silence, shoveling food into his mouth like he was fueling a machine. The candles flickered between us. The pecan pie sat untouched on the counter. 12 minutes later, he stood up, kissed the top of my head, and disappeared into his study. I sat there alone, staring at the candles until the wax pooled and dripped onto the tablecloth. That was the first time I cried myself to sleep. But it wouldn't be the last. The criticism started small, wrapped in concern. "Sweetheart, have you been snacking? You're looking a little soft around the middle. This roast is a bit overcooked, don't you think? Maybe you should set a timer next time. That outfit is interesting. Is that what women are wearing these days?" Each comment landed like a tiny stone, small enough to ignore individually, but collectively building into a weight I carried everywhere. I started second-guessing everything. Was my cooking good enough? Was I pretty enough? Was I smart enough? Was I enough? I'd stand in front of the mirror in the morning, pulling at my waistline, examining every line on my face, wondering what he saw when he looked at me, wondering why it never seemed to be enough. One Saturday afternoon, my best friend from church, Carol, called to invite me to lunch. Just the two of us, at the little cafe near the Riverside Arts Market. I'd love that, I told her, feeling a spark of excitement I hadn't felt in months. But when I mentioned it to Richard, he frowned. "Carol?" He looked up from the newspaper he was reading. "The one whose husband can't keep a job?" "That's not fair, Richard. Mike's been looking..." "Looking isn't the same as finding, Grace." He folded the newspaper with precise, deliberate movements. "I don't think it's a good idea for you to spend time with someone like that." I blinked. "Someone like what?" "Someone whose life is a mess. You know what they say. You become like the people you surround yourself with. Carol's probably going to spend the whole lunch complaining about money, and I don't want that kind of negativity influencing you. She's my friend, and I'm your husband." His voice was calm, reasonable, which somehow made it worse. "I'm just looking out for you, Grace. Is that such a terrible thing?" I opened my mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. So I called Carol back and canceled. I told her I wasn't feeling well. The disappointment in her voice made my chest ache. Richard started helping me with everything. That's what he called it, helping. He'd reorganized the kitchen cabinets after I'd spent an entire morning arranging them, explaining that his way was more logical, more efficient. He'd rewrite the grocery list I'd made, crossing off items he deemed unnecessary. "We don't need 3 types of cereal, Grace. That's wasteful." He'd critique the way I folded his shirts, the way I loaded the dishwasher, the way I vacuumed the living room. "You missed a spot there, and there. Here, let me show you the right way to do it." The right way. His way, always his way. I started to feel like a guest in my own home, like I was constantly being tested and constantly failing. One evening, I made the mistake of disagreeing with him in front of his brother Tom, who had stopped by for a beer. They were talking about politics, something about the upcoming election, and Richard made a comment about welfare recipients being lazy. Without thinking, I said, "I don't think that's entirely fair." My cousin Lisa is on food stamps right now because she got laid off, and she's been applying to jobs every single day. Richard turned to look at me, his eyes cold. Grace, honey, you don't really understand how the economy works. Tom and I are talking about macro-level policy, not your cousin's personal situation. Tom looked uncomfortable, glancing between us. I just meant, I know what you meant. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. But maybe it's best if you let the men discuss these things, okay? Why don't you get us some more beer? My face burned with humiliation. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and pulled 2 beers from the fridge with shaking hands. Through the doorway, I could hear Richard laughing. Sorry about that, Tom. Grace has a good heart, but she doesn't always think before she speaks. I stood there, gripping the cold bottles, feeling something inside me crack a little wider. But when I brought the beers out, I was smiling. Always smiling. Because that's what a good wife does, right? She smiles. She defers. She makes everyone comfortable, even when she's drowning. The worst part wasn't the criticism. The worst part was that I started to believe he was right. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I didn't understand things the way he did. Maybe I was lucky he was patient enough to correct me, to guide me, to put up with my inadequacies. Maybe the problem really was me. I started apologizing for everything. For meals that weren't perfect, for opinions that didn't match his, for existing in a way that seemed to constantly disappoint him. I'm sorry became my most common phrase. And Richard would smile that patient, condescending smile and say, It's okay, Grace. I know you're trying. You just need to try a little harder. So I did. I tried harder. I made myself smaller. I silenced my own voice. I became a shadow in my own life. And Richard seemed more satisfied than ever. He'd pat my head like I was a well-behaved pet. He'd tell his friends I was coming along nicely. He'd introduce me at church functions as my wife, Grace. She takes such good care of me. And everyone would smile and nod, believing the perfect picture he painted. No one saw the cracks. No one saw me disappearing. Not even me. Not yet. But deep down, in a place I was too afraid to acknowledge, something was stirring. A tiny ember of anger. A whisper of resistance. A voice that said, This isn't right. This isn't love. This isn't what you deserve. But I wasn't ready to listen to that voice yet. I wasn't ready to face what listening might mean. So I pushed it down, buried it deep, and kept smiling. Kept trying. Kept shrinking. And that was just the beginning. 3 years into our marriage, Richard stopped pretending. The mask he'd worn so carefully, the charming gentleman, the devoted husband, the respected community member, didn't disappear completely. He still wore it in public, at church, at work functions, anywhere people were watching. But at home, behind closed doors, with only me as his audience, the mask came off. And what I saw underneath terrified me. It started with the way he spoke to me, not the gentle corrections or the patient explanations he used to offer. This was different. This was contempt, pure and undiluted, delivered with a calm precision that somehow hurt more than yelling ever could. You really don't understand anything, do you? He'd say when I'd ask a question about our finances or our future plans. I don't know why I bother trying to explain things to you. It's like talking to a child. Or, You're lucky I married you, Grace. Do you realize that? A woman with your education level, your background. I could have had anyone, but I chose you. He'd say these things while buttering his toast, while reading the newspaper, while changing channels on the television. Casual cruelty, delivered like weather reports. And somehow that made it even worse. Because if he'd been yelling, if he'd been angry, I could have labeled it as a fight, as something temporary. But this was just his normal, his truth, his belief that he was fundamentally superior to me. The word he used most often was lucky. I was lucky he worked hard so I could stay home. Lucky he was patient with my shortcomings. Lucky he was willing to teach me how to be a proper wife. Lucky, lucky, lucky. As if I should spend every moment of every day on my knees, thanking God that Richard had chosen to bestow his presence upon my unworthy life. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the bedroom when he came home early from work. I didn't hear him come in, didn't know he was standing in the doorway watching me until he spoke. "Is that how you fold my dress shirts?" I jumped, dropping the shirt I was holding. "You scared me." He didn't apologize. He walked over, picked up the shirt, and examined it like it was evidence in a crime scene. "The collar is crooked. The sleeves aren't aligned properly. How many times do I have to show you the right way to do this?" I thought, "That's the problem, Grace. You thought. But you didn't think correctly, did you?" He tossed the shirt back onto the bed. "Do them all again, the right way this time." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Richard, I've been folding laundry for 3 hours. I'm tired." "You're tired?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're tired from folding laundry? Do you have any idea what I did today? I closed a deal worth $50,000. I sat through 3 meetings with people who actually matter, who actually contribute to society. I generated value. And you're tired from folding clothes?" The contempt in his voice was so thick I could taste it. "I just meant, I know what you meant. You meant that you think your day is somehow comparable to mine. That what you do here, making beds and cooking dinner, is somehow on the same level as what I do out there in the real world." He stepped closer, and I could smell the coffee on his breath. "Let me make something very clear to you, Grace. You live in this house because of me. You eat because of me. You exist in any kind of comfort because of me. So when I ask you to fold my shirts correctly, you don't complain about being tired. You say, 'Yes, Richard,' and you do it. Do you understand?" I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. Not anymore. "Yes," I whispered. "I understand." "Good." He straightened his tie, his face relaxing back into that calm, controlled expression. "I'm going to take a shower. I expect dinner to be ready by 6:30. And Grace, don't burn the chicken this time." I hadn't burned the chicken. Not once. But I didn't correct him. I just nodded and watched him walk away. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed, surrounded by his perfectly pressed shirts, and tried to remember who I used to be before I became this small, silent thing that lived in Richard's shadow. The isolation had become complete without me even noticing it happening. Carol had stopped calling after I'd canceled on her 3 times in a row. My mother's weekly phone calls had dwindled to monthly, then barely at all, because Richard would hover nearby whenever she called, making comments just loud enough for me to hear. "Still on the phone? Didn't you just talk to her last week?" Some of us have things to do, Grace. My sisters were busy with their own families, their own struggles. We'd exchange Christmas cards, the occasional birthday call, but the deep connection we'd once had felt like something from another lifetime. I had no friends, no job, no money of my own, no car. Richard had sold mine 6 months after we married, saying it was wasteful to have 2 vehicles when I had nowhere to go. My entire world had shrunk to the walls of our house, and the man who ruled over it like a king over a very small, very miserable kingdom. And the worst part? He made it seem reasonable. "Why do you need your own money?" he'd say when I asked about getting a part-time job. "I provide everything you need. Are you unhappy with something? Are you lacking something? Because if you are, you should tell me, and I'll decide if it's necessary. I'll decide. Always him, never me." The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in October. We were having dinner. Baked salmon with roasted vegetables and rice pilaf, everything cooked exactly to his specifications. I'd spent 2 hours in the kitchen, making sure every detail was perfect. Richard was telling me about his day, about some junior associate at work who had made a mistake on a client presentation. "The kid's an idiot," Richard said, cutting into his salmon. "Completely incompetent. I don't know why they hired him. Probably some diversity initiative. You know how it is these days. They'll hire anyone just to check a box, regardless of actual merit. I focused on my plate, pushing rice around with my fork. I had to completely redo his work, Richard continued. Stayed 2 hours late fixing his mess. The client never even knew there was a problem, because I'm that good at cleaning up after other people's mistakes. He paused, looking at me expectantly. That must have been frustrating, I said, because that's what he wanted. Validation, agreement, praise. It was. But that's the burden of competence, Grace. When you're as good as I am, you end up carrying everyone else. He took a sip of wine. It's the same way here. I carry this household. I carry you. And I do it without complaint because that's what a man does. Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the way he said, carry you, like I was a burden, dead weight he was forced to drag through life. Maybe it was the years of accumulated resentment finally reaching critical mass. Maybe I was just tired of being small. I work too, Richard, I said quietly. He looked up, surprised. Excuse me? I said I work too. I cook and clean and manage this entire household. That's work. His expression shifted, a slow smile spreading across his face. Not a kind smile, a predatory one. Oh, Grace, sweet, simple Grace. He set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. You think what you do is work? Real work? Work that matters? It matters to you when dinner isn't ready on time. It matters to you when your shirts aren't folded correctly. Any trained monkey could do what you do, he interrupted, his voice still calm, still controlled. What I do requires intelligence, skill, strategy. What you do requires following basic instructions. There's no comparison. The words hit me like a slap. That's not fair. Fair? He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. You want to talk about fair? Fair would be you showing some gratitude for the life I've given you instead of sitting there acting like you contribute anything of value to this marriage. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Where are you going? He asked, his tone shifting to irritation. Away from you, I said, my voice shaking. I walked toward the bedroom, but he was faster. He grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop me. We're not done here, he said, his face inches from mine. You don't walk away from me when I'm talking to you. Do you understand? I looked at his hand on my wrist, then up at his face, that handsome, respectable face that everyone in our community admired. And I saw him, really saw him. Not the man I'd married, not the man I'd thought he was, but the man he'd always been underneath, arrogant, controlling, cruel. A man who believed his own superiority was a fundamental truth of the universe. Let go of me, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, he released my wrist and stepped back, smoothing his hair with one hand. You're being dramatic, he said, his tone shifting back to that patronizing patience. This is why I have to be firm with you, Grace. You're too emotional. You take everything personally. I didn't respond. I just walked into the bedroom and closed the door. That night, lying in the dark with Richard sleeping soundly beside me, I finally let myself think the thought I'd been avoiding for years. I hate him. And right behind that thought came another, even more terrifying. I hate who I've become because of him. The months that followed that October night were the darkest of my life. I stopped fighting back, not because I'd accepted my situation, but because I'd run out of fight. It was like I'd been holding my breath underwater for so long that my body had simply given up, lungs screaming, vision going dark. I existed. That's all I did. I woke up, I made breakfast, I cleaned, I cooked. I waited for Richard to come home. I endured his commentary, his corrections, his casual reminders that I was less than. Then I went to bed and did it all over again the next day. A hamster wheel of humiliation. I barely recognized myself anymore. When I caught glimpses of my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I'd see a stranger staring back, hollow eyes, tight mouth, shoulders permanently hunched as if I was trying to make myself invisible. I was 30 years old, and I looked 50. I was alive, but I wasn't living. The isolation had become so complete that some days I wouldn't speak to another human being besides Richard. No phone calls, no visitors, no errands that required more than a silent transaction at the grocery store checkout. I was alone in a way that felt like drowning in slow motion. Richard, meanwhile, was thriving. He got another promotion at work, vice president of regional sales. It came with a substantial raise, a company car, and a new level of authority that fed his already bloated ego like gasoline on a fire. He started traveling more. Charlotte, Atlanta, sometimes as far as Chicago or Boston. He'd be gone for 3, 4, sometimes 5 days at a time, and I'd be left alone in that house, rattling around like a ghost. Part of me was relieved when he traveled. The house felt lighter without his presence, like I could finally breathe without someone monitoring every breath. I'd leave dishes in the sink overnight. I'd watch whatever I wanted on television. I'd eat cereal for dinner standing at the counter, not bothering with plates or proper meals. Small rebellions that felt pathetic even as I committed them. But another part of me, a part I was ashamed to acknowledge, felt abandoned. Because even though Richard made me miserable, he was all I had. My entire identity had become so wrapped up in being his wife that when he was gone, I wasn't sure who I was supposed to be. It was on one of those lonely nights, with Richard in Atlanta, and me sitting on the couch in my nightgown at 10 o'clock watching some mindless sitcom that my mother called. I almost didn't answer. It had been months since we'd spoken, and I knew she'd hear the emptiness in my voice, the defeat. Mothers always know, but I picked up anyway. Maybe because I was desperate for any human connection, even one that would require me to lie. Gracie? Her voice was warm, familiar, and it cracked something open inside me. Hi, Mama. I've been worried about you, baby. I haven't heard from you in so long. There was concern in her tone, but also something else. Hurt, maybe. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, I said automatically, the lie so practiced it came out smooth. Just busy, you know, taking care of the house and... How's Richard? The question hung in the air between us. He's good. Got another promotion. He's traveling a lot for work. That must be lonely for you. The sympathy in her voice nearly undid me. I felt tears prickling behind my eyes, my throat tightening. I'm fine, Mama. Really. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, and I knew she was deciding whether to push or let it go. Gracie, honey, you know you can tell me if something's wrong, don't you? If you need help. I don't need help. The words came out sharper than I intended. I'm fine. Richard is fine. Everything is fine. Another pause. Okay, she said softly. Okay, baby, I love you. You know that, right? The tears spilled over then, silent and hot down my cheeks. I know, Mama. I love you too. After we hung up, I sat there in the dark, crying in a way I hadn't let myself cry in years. Big, ugly, gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest. I cried for the girl I used to be, for the dreams I'd had, for the life I thought I was building. I cried because I was trapped and I couldn't see a way out. I cried because even though I hated Richard, even though he'd destroyed me piece by piece, the thought of leaving him was somehow more terrifying than staying. Where would I go? I had no money, no job, no car, no recent work experience. I'd been out of the workforce for years, doing nothing but cooking and cleaning and being told I was worthless. Who would hire me? Who would want me? Richard's voice echoed in my head. You're lucky I chose you. You could never make it on your own. And the worst part? I believed him. The gota d'agua, the final drop that made the glass overflow, came on a Saturday morning in late February. Richard was home, working in his study on some proposal. I was in the kitchen, making lunch. The radio was playing softly, some old song I barely registered. I was slicing tomatoes for sandwiches when the knife slipped. It wasn't a deep cut, just a shallow slice across my left index finger, but it bled immediately, bright red drops falling onto the cutting board. "Damn it," I muttered, grabbing a dish towel and wrapping it around my finger. Richard appeared in the doorway. "What happened?" "Just a small cut. It's nothing." He walked over, took my hand, and unwrapped the towel to examine the cut. For a moment, just a brief, flickering moment, I thought I saw something like concern in his eyes, but then he dropped my hand and stepped back. "Be more careful," he said. "I need those sandwiches ready in 15 minutes. I have a conference call." "No, are you okay? No, let me get you a bandage." No acknowledgement that I was a human being who had just hurt myself, even in a small way. Just a reminder that my only value was in my ability to serve him. I stood there, blood seeping through the dish towel, and something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger exactly. It was colder than that, clearer. It was the moment you realize you're standing in a burning building and you have two choices: stay and burn, or walk through the flames and risk everything for a chance at survival. "Okay," I said quietly. Richard nodded and went back to his study. I finished making the sandwiches with one hand, the other wrapped in paper towels and masking tape because I couldn't find the first aid kit. My finger throbbed, but I barely noticed. I was too busy thinking, really thinking, for the first time in years. I delivered Richard's lunch to his study on a tray. Sandwich cut diagonally, chips arranged neatly, a glass of iced tea with exactly 2 ice cubes, the way he liked it. He didn't look up from his computer, just waved his hand in acknowledgement. I walked back to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and stared at my bandaged finger, and I made a decision. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know when. I didn't have a plan or resources or any clear path forward. But I knew, with a certainty that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds, that I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't keep being this small, broken version of myself. I couldn't keep letting Richard's voice drown out my own. I couldn't keep dying slowly in a house that was supposed to be my home but felt like a prison. Something had to change. I had to change. Because the alternative, spending the rest of my life like this, becoming more and more invisible until I disappeared completely, was worse than any fear I had about leaving. I didn't pray much anymore. Richard had managed to poison even that for me, turning church into another performance, another place where I had to smile and pretend. But sitting there at that kitchen table with my throbbing finger and my racing heart and my barely formed determination, I closed my eyes and whispered, "God, if you're listening, I need help. I need strength. I need a way out." And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something stir inside me. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Something that felt like the first breath after nearly drowning. I opened my eyes. The kitchen looked the same. The radio was still playing. Richard was still in his study, probably already having forgotten about my cut finger, about me entirely. Nothing had changed, but everything had changed, because I had woken up different that morning, and I would never go back to sleep again. For 3 weeks after that Saturday morning, I moved through the house like a woman gathering intelligence. I didn't confront Richard. I didn't change my behavior. I smiled when he expected smiles, cooked what he wanted cooked, stayed silent when he needed an audience for his monologues about his own brilliance. But inside, I was planning. Quietly, carefully, like a prisoner studying the guards' routines, looking for weaknesses in the walls. I started with small things, practical things. When Richard traveled to Atlanta for 4 days, I walked to the public library, 3 miles each way in the humid Florida heat, and asked the librarian how to get a copy of my birth certificate. She helped me fill out the form, paid for with quarters I'd been secretly collecting from the change Richard would empty onto his dresser each night. I requested a copy of our marriage license from the county clerk's office. I found the documents Richard kept in his study, Insurance papers, the deed to the house, bank statements. And when he was at work, I'd carefully photocopy them at the library, my hands shaking the entire time, certain someone would catch me and ask what I was doing. I was documenting my own life, proving I existed, gathering evidence of a marriage that, on paper, looked perfectly normal. I called my sister Sarah from a payphone outside the Winn-Dixie, using quarters, because Richard checked our home phone bill religiously and questioned every unfamiliar number. "Grace?" She sounded shocked to hear from me. "Is everything okay?" "I need to ask you something," I said, my voice low even though no one was around. "If I needed a place to stay, just temporarily, could I come to you?" The pause on the other end felt like an eternity. "Are you leaving him?" she asked carefully. "I'm thinking about it. Thank God." Her voice cracked with relief. "Grace, I've been worried about you for years. You've seemed so gone, like you disappeared." Tears stung my eyes. "I know. You can come here any time, day or night. I mean it. Just call me and I'll come get you. I don't care if it's 3 a.m. "I can't yet," I said. "I need to figure some things out first. But I needed to know I had somewhere to go." "You do. Always." After we hung up, I stood by that payphone for 10 minutes, just breathing, feeling something like hope expanding in my chest. I had an escape route now. It wasn't much, but it was something. The real turning point came on a Thursday night in March. Richard came home from work in an unusually good mood. He'd closed a major deal, something about a client in Orlando committing to a multi-year contract. "This is it, Grace," he said over dinner, his eyes bright with excitement. "This is the deal that's going to put me on the map. Regional recognition, maybe even national. I'm going to be somebody." As if he wasn't already constantly reminding me he was somebody. "That's wonderful," I said, pushing pasta around my plate. "You know what this means?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "More money. A lot more money. We can finally move out of this middle-class neighborhood, get a house that actually reflects my status. Something in Ponte Vedra Beach, maybe. Something with a view." He wasn't asking my opinion. He was telling me what was going to happen. "And you," he continued, pointing his fork at me, "you're going to need to step up. If we're moving in those circles, I need a wife who can keep up. Who looks the part, acts the part." "What does that mean?" "It means no more of this." He gestured vaguely at me. "This frumpy housewife thing you've got going on. I'll need you to dress better, lose some weight, maybe do something with your hair. I can't have people thinking I married beneath me." The words hung in the air between us. I can't have people thinking I married beneath me. 7 years. 7 years I'd given this man. 7 years of shrinking myself, silencing myself, erasing myself to fit into his vision of what a wife should be. And he thought I was beneath him. "Say something," Richard prompted, a slight edge creeping into his voice. "This is good news, Grace. You should be happy. I'm giving you a better life." I set down my fork very carefully. "No," I said quietly. He blinked. "What?" I said no. "I'm not moving to Ponte Vedra Beach. I'm not changing myself to fit your image of what a proper wife should be. I'm not doing any of it." The confusion on his face would have been comical if the moment weren't so terrifying. "Grace, I don't think you understand." "I understand perfectly." My voice was shaking but steady. "I understand that you think I'm beneath you, that I'm an embarrassment, that I'm something you need to fix or upgrade or replace. I didn't say replace. You didn't have to." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Do you know what I realized, Richard? I realized that I've spent 7 years trying to be good enough for you, trying to meet your impossible standards, trying to become whoever you needed me to be that day. Grace, sit down. You're being dramatic." And I realized something else. I was crying now, but I didn't care. "I'm never going to be good enough, because you don't want a wife, You want a servant, an audience, a mirror that reflects back how wonderful you think you are. He stood up too, his face darkening. You need to calm down. No. The word came out stronger this time. I don't need to calm down. I need to tell you the truth, finally, after all these years of swallowing it. The truth? He laughed, that ugly, dismissive laugh I'd come to hate. What truth, Grace? That you're ungrateful? That you don't appreciate everything I've given you? The truth, I said, my voice breaking, is that you're not a good man. You're not even a kind man. You're arrogant and controlling, and you've spent our entire marriage making me feel worthless, so you could feel superior. His face went very still, very cold. You have no idea what you're talking about, he said slowly. I have given you everything, a home, security, a life you could never have achieved on your own. I know. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, and you've never let me forget it. Not for a single day. We stood there, the dinner table between us, 7 years of resentment and pain, crystallizing into this one terrible moment. If you're so unhappy, Richard said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, then maybe you should leave. He said it like a challenge, like he knew I wouldn't, like he knew I was too scared, too dependent, too broken to actually do it. And maybe a month ago, he would have been right. But something in me had changed. That small spark I'd felt sitting at the kitchen table with my bleeding finger had grown into something bigger, something that refused to be extinguished. Maybe I will, I said. The shock on his face was almost worth the terror flooding through me. Excuse me? Maybe I will leave. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. Maybe I'm done being your project, your disappointment, your servant. You can't be serious. He laughed again, but there was uncertainty in it now. Where would you even go? You have no money, no job, no car. You're completely dependent on me. I know, I nodded. You made sure of that, didn't you? Made sure I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, made sure I was isolated and trapped. That's not... Yes, it is. I felt something like clarity washing over me. That's exactly what you did. And you did it deliberately, because a wife who has options is a wife who might leave, and you couldn't risk that. Richard's jaw clenched. You're being hysterical. No. I shook my head. I'm being honest. For the first time in years, I'm being honest. And the honest truth is that I would rather be poor and alone than spend one more day being made to feel small by you. You won't last a week without me, he said. But there was something desperate in his voice now. You'll come crawling back, begging me to take you back, and maybe I will, maybe. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time ever. Not the charming man I'd met at that church potluck, not the successful businessman everyone admired, not even the cruel husband who'd systematically destroyed my self-worth. Just a deeply insecure man who needed to make others feel small so he could feel big. A man who was, underneath all the arrogance and bravado, terrified of being ordinary. And in that moment, I stopped being afraid of him. You know what the saddest part is, Richard? I said softly. I actually loved you once. The man I thought you were. But that man never existed, did he? It was just a performance, just a mask you wore until you thought I was trapped. He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. I'm going to bed. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about how this divorce is going to work. The word hung in the air like a grenade. Divorce. You can't, he started. Yes, I said, turning toward the bedroom. I can, and I will. I walked away from him, my legs shaking, my heart racing, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, to apologize, to make it okay. But I kept walking, and with every step, I felt lighter. Like I'd been carrying a crushing weight for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. I closed the bedroom door behind me and leaned against it, waiting for him to follow, to rage, to demand I come back out. But he didn't. The house was silent. And in that silence, I heard something I hadn't heard in 7 years. My own voice. Clear and strong and real, telling me that I was going to survive this, that I was going to be okay, that the hardest part, the speaking up, the standing up, the refusing to be small anymore, was behind me now. Everything else was just logistics. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Richard for 7 years, listening to him pace in the living room, listening to the clink of glass against glass as he poured himself drink after drink, listening to the occasional muffled curse or the slam of a cabinet door. But I didn't go to him. I didn't try to soothe him or take back what I'd said. I just lay there in the dark, running through scenarios in my mind, planning, calculating, preparing for what came next. When morning came, Richard was gone. He'd left early for work without saying goodbye, without even a note, just his coffee mug in the sink and the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the hallway. Part of me wondered if he thought I'd come to my senses by the time he got home, that I'd realize how foolish I was being and go back to being quiet, compliant Grace. He was going to be disappointed. I called my sister from that same payphone outside the Winn-Dixie. "Sarah, it's me. I need that place to stay. Soon." "When?" "Maybe a week. I need to get a few things in order first." "Grace, are you safe? Do you need me to come get you right now?" The concern in her voice made my throat tight. "I'm okay. He's not violent. He's just controlling. But I'm going to leave. I promise. I just need a few more days." "Okay. But if anything changes, you call me immediately, day or night." "I will." The next 3 days were surreal. Richard and I moved around each other like strangers in a house neither of us wanted to be in. He'd come home from work, go straight to his study, and stay there until late into the night. I'd make dinner, leave a plate for him outside his door, and eat alone in the kitchen. We didn't speak. But the silence between us was different now. Before, my silence had been submission. Now it was resistance. He knew it too. I could see it in the way he'd glance at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Confusion, anger, and underneath it all, something that looked almost like fear. Because the power dynamic had shifted, and he didn't know how to handle it. On the 4th day, I was in the bedroom packing a small suitcase when he appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing?" His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the tension underneath. "Packing. I can see that. Where are you going?" I folded a sweater and placed it in the suitcase. "To my sister's. Just for a while, until we figure out the details." "Grace." He stepped into the room, and I saw a flash of the old Richard, the charming one, the persuasive one. "Let's talk about this. Really talk. We don't have to do anything drastic." "It's already done, Richard. We can get counseling. Marriage counseling. There are people who specialize in this kind of thing." "In what kind of thing?" I turned to face him. "In husbands who spend years destroying their wives' self-esteem? In relationships built on control and contempt?" "That's not fair." "No," I interrupted, my voice firm. "What's not fair is what you've done to me. What's not fair is that I lost myself trying to be what you wanted, and it still wasn't enough." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen 1,000 times. "So that's it? 7 years of marriage, and you're just walking away?" "I'm not walking away from 7 years of marriage, Richard. I'm walking away from 7 years of being told I'm not good enough. There's a difference." "You're making a huge mistake." His voice hardened. "You think life is going to be better out there on your own? You have no job skills, no money, no prospects. You're going to end up broke and alone, wishing you'd stayed." I zipped the suitcase closed and looked at him. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe I will struggle. Maybe I'll work minimum wage jobs and live in a tiny apartment and barely scrape by. But at least I'll be doing it on my own terms, At least I'll be free." "Free?" He laughed bitterly. "Free to be what? A cautionary tale? My mother was right about you. She said you didn't have what it takes to be a proper wife." "Good." I picked up my suitcase. "Then we're in agreement. I'm not what you need, and you're definitely not what I need." I walked past him, my shoulder brushing his arm, and headed toward the front door. He followed me. Grace, wait." I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. "What?" When I turned, I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Genuine panic. "Don't do this," he said, and his voice had lost its commanding edge. "Please, we can work this out. I'll try to be better. I'll listen more. Richard." I said his name gently, almost sadly. "You don't want to be better. You don't think you need to be better. You think I need to be better. And that's why this can't work." "I love you," he said, and it sounded like a last-ditch effort, words he thought might change my mind. "No, you don't," I replied. "You love having someone to control, someone to feel superior to, someone to serve you and admire you and never challenge you. But that's not love, Richard. That's just ownership." I opened the door. Behind me, I heard him say, "You'll regret this." I didn't turn around. Maybe, but I regret staying this long even more. And then I walked out. Sarah picked me up at a gas station 2 miles from the house. When I got into her car, she took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." And that's when I broke down. All the fear, all the tension, all the years of holding myself together came pouring out in great heaving sobs. She just held me and let me cry. The first few weeks at Sarah's house were strange. I felt like a teenager again, sleeping on her couch, eating meals her family prepared, trying to figure out who I was supposed to be now. Some mornings, I'd wake up and panic, thinking I'd overslept, that Richard would be angry I hadn't made his breakfast. Then I'd remember where I was and feel a mix of relief and terror. I was free, but I was also completely unmoored. Sarah helped me find a job at a department store. Nothing glamorous, just working the register and helping customers find items. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but it was mine. Money I earned. Money Richard couldn't control. My first paycheck, I cried. 43 hours of work, and I held that check in my hands like it was made of gold. I opened a bank account in my own name, just mine, no joint anything. I bought my own groceries, cheap generic brands, things that would stretch, and I made my own meals on my own schedule. I started wearing colors Richard had told me didn't suit me. Bright yellows, deep purples, red. I cut my hair shorter than he'd ever allowed. Small acts of rebellion that felt like revolution. The divorce process was ugly. Richard fought me on everything, the house, the car, even furniture I'd brought into the marriage. His lawyer painted me as an ungrateful wife, abandoning a good man. But I had a lawyer too, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia who'd worked with abuse survivors before. She recognized the patterns immediately. "Financial abuse," she said, reviewing the documents I'd copied. "Isolation, emotional manipulation, classic controlling behavior." It was the first time anyone had named what had happened to me. Not just a bad marriage, not just incompatibility, abuse. The word sat heavy in my chest, but it also felt like validation, like permission to stop blaming myself. The divorce took 8 months to finalize. 8 months of court dates and negotiations, and Richard's lawyer trying to paint me as mentally unstable, as a woman who'd had some kind of breakdown and abandoned her responsibilities. But I held firm. And on a Tuesday morning in November, a judge signed the papers that made me Grace Thompson again. Not Grace Morgan, not Richard's wife, just Grace. I walked out of that courthouse into the humid Florida air, and for the first time in nearly a decade, I felt like I could breathe all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. The first year on my own was hard. I worked long hours at the department store, eventually moving up to supervisor. I rented a tiny studio apartment in a neighborhood that wasn't fancy, but was safe. I learned to budget every dollar, to fix things myself when they broke, to be resourceful in ways I'd never had to be before. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Carol from church, who cried when I called her and said she'd never given up on me. My mother, who drove down from Tampa and held me while I told her everything, all the details I'd hidden for years. I started going to a support group for women leaving controlling relationships. Sitting in that circle of folding chairs in a church basement, listening to other women's stories, I realized I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak. I was a survivor. And slowly, painfully slowly, but still, I started to remember who I used to be. The girl who'd moved to Jacksonville with $50 and a dream of independence. The woman who'd wanted something more, even when she didn't know what that looked like. I started taking night classes at the community college. Nothing ambitious at first, just a few courses in business administration, but it felt like planting seeds, like building toward something. On my 33rd birthday, I had dinner with Sarah and her family. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread and a store-bought cake. But as I sat there, surrounded by people who loved me, who saw me, who valued me, I realized something profound. I was happy. Not because everything was perfect, not because I had everything figured out, but because I was free. Free to make my own choices, free to make my own mistakes, free to be imperfect and struggling and still worthy of love and respect. That night, lying in my small apartment, in my own bed, in my own space, I whispered into the darkness, I did it. I actually did it. And for the first time in years, when I closed my eyes, I didn't see Richard's disappointed face or hear his critical voice. I just saw myself, whole, healing, free. I'm 68 years old now, and when I look back at that woman I used to be, the one who walked out of Richard's house with a single suitcase and more fear than hope, I barely recognize her. But I'm proud of her, so proud, because she did the hardest thing a person can do. She chose herself when the entire world had taught her to choose everyone else first. The years after the divorce weren't easy. I'm not going to sit here and tell you some fairy tale where everything fell into place the moment I left. Life doesn't work that way. Freedom doesn't come with a manual or a safety net or a guarantee that everything will be okay. But it comes with something better, the chance to rebuild yourself on your own terms. I worked at that department store for 3 years, eventually becoming assistant manager. The work was exhausting, long hours on my feet, dealing with difficult customers, managing inventory, but it was mine. Every decision I made, every problem I solved, every small success reminded me that I was capable, that Richard had been wrong about me. I finished my associate's degree at the community college when I was 35. It took me 4 years of night classes and weekend studying, juggling work and school, and trying to build a life that felt meaningful. When I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, my mother and Sarah were in the audience, cheering louder than anyone else. Richard wasn't there, of course. He'd remarried by then. A younger woman, I heard through mutual acquaintances. Someone who probably thought he was charming and successful and everything I'd once thought he was. I hoped, for her sake, that he'd changed. But I doubted it. Men like Richard don't change unless they believe there's something fundamentally broken in them. And Richard's entire identity was built on the belief that he was superior to everyone around him. You can't fix what you refuse to acknowledge. Eventually, I got a job as an administrative assistant at a medical clinic. Better pay, better hours, benefits. I rented a small house with a yard where I planted tomatoes and herbs. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. The front door locked from the inside, and no one told me what I could or couldn't do within those walls. I dated occasionally, cautiously, men I met at church functions or through friends. Nice men mostly, kind men, but I was gun-shy, hyper-aware of red flags, terrified of falling back into old patterns. One man, Thomas, a divorced accountant with kind eyes and a quiet demeanor, got frustrated with me after 3 months. "Grace, I feel like you're always waiting for me to turn into someone else," he said over coffee one Sunday afternoon. "Like you don't trust that I'm actually who I say I am." He was right, of course. "I'm sorry," I said. "It's not about you. It's about what I went through before. I understand that. But at some point, you have to decide whether you're going to let your past ruin your future." We broke up shortly after that conversation, and I spent weeks wondering if he was right. If I was so damaged by Richard that I'd never be able to trust anyone again. But then I realized something. There's a difference between being damaged and being careful. I wasn't broken. I was wise. I had learned, through pain and hardship, to recognize warning signs, to value my own peace more than companionship, to understand that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who makes you feel small. That wasn't damage. That was growth. I met my second husband, my real husband I call him, when I was 42 years old. His name was Daniel. He was a widower, a retired high school teacher with silver hair and laugh lines around his eyes. We met at a community garden where we both volunteered on Saturday mornings. He was patient with me, gentle. He never pushed, never demanded, never made me feel like I owed him anything. He seemed genuinely interested in who I was, my thoughts, my opinions, my dreams, not who he could mold me into being. It took me a year to agree to marry him. Not because I didn't love him, but because I was terrified. Terrified that marriage would mean losing myself again, that I'd slip back into old patterns of shrinking and silencing and disappearing. The night before our wedding, I almost called it off. Daniel found me sitting on his back porch at midnight, wrapped in a blanket, crying. "Hey," he said softly, sitting down beside me. "Talk to me." "What if I can't do this?" I whispered. "What if I don't know how to be married without losing myself?" He was quiet for a long moment, just sitting with me in the darkness. "Grace," he finally said, "I don't want you to lose yourself. I fell in love with who you are, strong, independent, a little stubborn. If you marry me and start trying to be someone else, someone you think I want, I'm going to be disappointed, because that's not the woman I asked to marry me." I looked at him through my tears. What if I'm difficult? What if I question things and push back and refuse to just go along? "Good," he said, taking my hand. "I don't want a yes woman. I want a partner, someone who challenges me and keeps me honest and isn't afraid to tell me when I'm being an idiot." And that's when I knew, really knew, this was different. He was different. We were married for 18 years before he passed away from a heart attack. 18 years of partnership, of mutual respect, of being seen and valued and loved for exactly who I was. He never once made me feel small, never once suggested I needed to change or improve or become something other than myself. When we disagreed, and we did, because that's what real partners do, we talked it through like adults, with respect, with kindness. He reminded me what love was supposed to look like, and when he died, I grieved him deeply. But I didn't fall apart, because he'd spent our entire marriage building me up, helping me remember my own strength, encouraging me to pursue my interests and maintain my independence. Even in death, his love freed me rather than imprisoned me. Now, at 68, living here in Jacksonville in a small house near my daughter Melissa and her family, I have the perspective that only age and experience can provide. I understand now what I couldn't see at 24, that the right person doesn't make you smaller. They make you more yourself, more confident, more capable, more alive. Richard didn't destroy me because he was uniquely evil. He destroyed me because I let him, because I believed the lie that women of my generation were taught from birth, that a man's approval was more important than our own self-respect, that keeping the peace was more valuable than keeping our souls intact. I let him define my worth. I let him control my narrative. I let him convince me that I was lucky to be chosen by him, when the truth was that he should have felt lucky I chose him. But I don't blame that young woman anymore. the one who stayed too long, who accepted too little, who shrank herself to fit into someone else's vision. She was doing the best she could with the tools she'd been given, with the messages she'd internalized, with the limited options she believed she had. I honor her for surviving, and I honor her even more for eventually finding the courage to leave. The lesson I learned, the one I wish I could go back and tell my 24-year-old self, is this: you are not required to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You are not responsible for managing someone else's ego at the expense of your own soul. You are not lucky to be chosen by someone who treats you with contempt. And most importantly, leaving is not giving up. Sometimes leaving is the bravest, strongest, most self-loving thing you can do. I think about the women who might be where I was, sitting at kitchen tables, wondering if they're crazy, wondering if it's really that bad, wondering if they'll survive on their own. And I want to reach through time and space and hold their hands and tell them, yes, it is that bad. No, you're not crazy. And yes, you will not only survive, you will thrive. But first, you have to believe you deserve better. You have to believe that your voice matters, that your feelings are valid, that your needs are important. You have to believe that you are worthy of love that doesn't hurt. And then you have to be brave enough to walk away from anything that makes you feel less than whole. It won't be easy. The road ahead will be hard and uncertain and sometimes terrifying. But on the other side of that fear is a version of yourself you forgot existed. Strong, clear, free. And honey, let me tell you, she's been waiting for you all along. I learned that no one can make you feel small unless you let them. I learned that loving yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. I learned that sometimes the greatest act of faith isn't staying and hoping things will change. Sometimes it's leaving and trusting that you'll be okay. And I was. I am. I will be. Because I chose myself. And that choice saved my life. There's one more thing I need to tell you. Something I discovered years after the divorce. Something that changed how I understood everything that happened between Richard and me. I ran into his younger sister, Patricia, at a public supermarket about 15 years after I'd left him. I almost didn't recognize her. She'd aged considerably, her face lined with worry, her shoulders hunched in a way that looked painfully familiar. We made awkward small talk in the produce section, both of us aware of the elephant between us. She'd sided with Richard during the divorce, had testified on his behalf about what a good man he was, how devoted. But as we were saying goodbye, she grabbed my arm. "Grace, wait. Can we talk? Really talk? Maybe get coffee?" Something in her voice made me say yes. We sat in a corner booth at a nearby diner, and for 10 minutes, neither of us spoke. She just stirred her coffee around and around, like she was trying to find the right words at the bottom of the cup. Finally, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for what I said during your divorce, for not believing you, for defending him." I didn't know what to say. "I get it now," she continued, her voice breaking. "I didn't understand then. I thought you were exaggerating, being dramatic. But now I'm living it." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "My husband, Tom. He's just like Richard. The control, the criticism, the way he makes me feel like I'm stupid, worthless, lucky he puts up with me." She laughed bitterly. "I've been married to him for 12 years, and I just realized a few months ago that I've become exactly what you were. Small, silent, afraid." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Patricia, you can leave. You know that, right? You can..." "Can I?" She looked at me with such desperation. "How did you do it? How did you find the courage when you had nothing? When everyone told you that you were making a mistake?" And so I told her. Everything. The fear, the planning, the moment I finally chose myself over safety. The hard years that followed. The reconstruction of my identity, piece by painful peace. "But here's what I need you to understand," I said, squeezing her hand. "Richard learned it somewhere. That behavior, that belief that women exist to serve and admire and never challenge." Patricia's face went very still. "Your father," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "I saw it at family dinners, the way he talked to your mother. The way he expected her to anticipate his every need, to disappear when he wanted space, to appear when he wanted an audience." "She never said anything," Patricia whispered. "She never fought back, never complained. I thought that's just what wives did." "So did I said, until I nearly disappeared trying to do it." We sat in that diner for 3 hours. By the time we left, Patricia had my sister's phone number, the name of my old lawyer, and a promise that she could call me day or night if she needed support. She left Tom 8 months later, and in leaving him, she broke a cycle that had probably been running in that family for generations. That encounter taught me something profound. Richard wasn't a monster. He was a man who'd been taught that dominance was love, that control was care, that a woman's submission was proof of his worth as a man. His mother had modeled it, his father had demanded it, and Richard had internalized it so deeply that he genuinely believed he was being a good husband by guiding me, correcting me, shaping me into something acceptable. He probably told himself he loved me. He probably believed he was helping me. But love that requires you to become less of yourself isn't love at all. It's just another form of violence, dressed up in respectable clothes. Now, sitting here at 68, with my daughter visiting on weekends and my grandson's laughter filling rooms that used to echo with criticism, I can say this with certainty. Leaving Richard was the best decision I ever made. Not because my life became perfect. It didn't. Not because I never struggled. I did, for years. But because I got myself back. The self I'd almost forgotten existed. The woman with opinions and preferences and boundaries and dreams. The woman who could say no without apologizing. The woman who could take up space without feeling guilty. That woman was always there, buried under years of conditioning and fear and learned helplessness. She was just waiting for permission to exist, and the only person who could give her that permission was me. My daughter Melissa, Daniel's daughter, who I raised as my own after we married, asked me once why I never talked badly about Richard, even after everything he put me through. "Aren't you angry?" she asked. "Don't you hate him?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. "I was angry," I finally said. "For years I was furious. At him for what he did. At myself for letting it happen. At the world for teaching us both that his behavior was normal, acceptable, even admirable. But now I mostly feel sad. Sad for the woman I was, who believed she deserved so little. Sad for Richard, who will probably never understand what he lost when he chose control over connection. Sad for all the women still living in houses that feel like prisons, wondering if they're strong enough to leave." "Are they?" Melissa asked. "Strong enough?" I smiled. "They're stronger than they know. They just haven't discovered it yet." That's what I want you to understand if you're listening to this and seeing yourself in my story. You are stronger than you know. The fact that you're still here, still functioning, still showing up day after day in a relationship that diminishes you, that takes an enormous amount of strength. You're just directing that strength in the wrong direction, using it to hold yourself together instead of using it to set yourself free. But that strength is there, waiting, ready. And when you finally decide to use it to save yourself instead of to survive someone else's cruelty, you'll be amazed at what you're capable of. You'll be amazed at the life you can build. You'll be amazed at the woman you become when no one is telling you to be smaller, quieter, less. I gave myself completely to a man who seemed like a gift from God, and he destroyed me with his pride. But here's the plot twist. Being destroyed wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning, because from those ashes, I built something Richard could never touch, never diminish, never control. I built myself, not the version he wanted, not the version I thought I was supposed to be, but the authentic, messy, imperfect, resilient woman I was always meant to become. And that woman? She's pretty magnificent, not because she's perfect or successful or impressive by society's standards, but because she survived, she escaped, she healed, and she learned to love herself with the same intensity she once used to love a man who didn't deserve it. If you're in a relationship where you feel yourself shrinking, where you question your own reality, where love feels like a test you're constantly failing, please hear me. You deserve better. You always did. And you have the power to choose it, even when it terrifies you. Even when everyone tells you you're making a mistake. Even when the path forward is dark and uncertain. Because the only real mistake is staying in a place that's killing your spirit, one small cut at a time, until there's nothing left of who you used to be. I'm 68 years old. I'm a grandmother. I live in a modest house in Jacksonville, and I volunteer at a women's shelter twice a week, helping other women find the courage I once had to find. My life isn't glamorous. It isn't the fairy tale I imagined at 24. But it's mine. Every choice, every mistake, every triumph, mine. And there's a freedom in that, a peace that I never found in any relationship where I had to pretend to be less than I was. So this is my message to you, whoever you are, wherever you are. Choose yourself, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Choose yourself, your future self, the one who's finally free, finally whole, finally at peace, is waiting for you to be brave enough to walk toward her. Don't keep her waiting too long. She's been through enough already. And you? Have you ever given yourself completely to someone who made you feel small? Have you ever had to choose between staying and surviving, or leaving and discovering who you really are? Drop a comment below. Share your story, your truth, your courage, because somewhere out there, another woman is reading this, wondering if she's strong enough to leave, and maybe your words will be the thing that finally convinces her she is. Thank you for listening to my story, for seeing me, for understanding. And remember, you deserve love that makes you bigger, not smaller. You deserve love that feels like freedom. You always did.